Dragon's Dogma 2 from the jump could prove to be a classic worth playing a decade from now, considering its notoriety in the action RPG genre for its innovative combat system, diverse vocation, class system, interactive mechanics, overall gameplay feel, and hitboxes. These elements converge to create an immersive and engaging experience for players, though not without its many flaws. At the core lies its combat system, to which their own priority acts as the crux and glue that keeps the game fresh for a long-form playstyle. Later on I'll get into how these other systems cause enough friction to hinder this sense of replayability. But on its own, it blends the strategic elements of ARPGs with the intensity of real-time combat. Players aren't bound by a traditional class system. Instead, they can freely switch between vocations, each offering unique abilities and playstyles. This freedom encourages experimentation. It allows players to tailor their character to preferred archetype. Whether you're wielding a classic sword and board as a fighter, casting support spells as a mage, sliding past your enemies in a blinding flurry of slashes as thief, or bonking your head against the wall and charging up a single attack until the boss is dead as a warrior, the combat feels fluid and responsive. I think it's without question that the vocation distinction is one of the most notable features that keeps Dragon's Dogma 1 and 2 a top competitor for other games. Each vocation has strengths and weaknesses, and mastering multiple vocations is the key to success. However, while the variety is commendable, some vocations lack the desired depth compared to others. For instance, I believe Warrior excels at being a strong, leading offensive, and is one of the tankiest builds. The slow and deliberate approach to encounters best suits those who enjoy Dark Souls combat. However, it lacks any real mobility outside the one charge attack. And this is kind of where the dissension begins. You have one part of the community that thinks the lack of mobility in other vocations like warrior or mage or sorcerer is what makes it good because it's playing up to the fantasy of that role. It plays up to the party system. You need to rely on your pawns in order to get things done if you don't prioritize balance. So let's say you have a group of 4 warriors. It'd be difficult to fight harpies, and there are a lot of harpies in the game. To down them, you would need to jump and slash at them, which is not the most effective way to handle it. Otherwise, you'd be waiting around for a drake or harpy to land in order to actually do damage. Then on the other side of the community, there are those who believe that having a little bit more mobility wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. It's not like having a dodge or a roll would completely take away the fantasy feel of that class. And I kind of fall along these lines. I feel as if having a quick roll would more so serve to enhance the experience over not at all. This topic is one of those things where you might just go back and forth with thinking about how other games do it and how it's better for it, while this game doubles down on not holding your hand and not guiding you through features that are present in every other game. So in that sense, I'm a little bit torn as to what I personally want. I would say I don't think it would be a complete hindrance to the gameplay if a dodge roll was present. I mean, if Elden Ring and Dark Souls can do it and it feels fine, if Witcher 3 can do it and it feels fine, why not Dragon's Dogma? I don't feel so strongly about it that it needs to be a big thing. It's more of a what if, If Capcom's design philosophy is to create a further distinction between those classes, or reward a level of preparedness or skill and create arbitrary difficulty, then it doesn't really hit the mark for me sometimes. If anything, it falls short of rewarding, hindering player agency, and instead giving us the boon of getting shocked by lightning, then carried off by a wolf to be munched on for 10 seconds until I either run out of stamina and die, or a pawn comes to my aid. While I like that, I'm just venting frustration for how this could be easily avoided by playing other vocations. I feel like I have the right to kind of talk about some of the annoying parts of the game, even if it does make the experience all the more unique compared to other games. But nonetheless, I don't like getting stunned. Some of these aspects just feel unavoidable, where my skill developed from hundreds of hours in the first game are now still void. Even more so with DD2, the real difficulty lies in my camera getting caught against the wall, combat encounter taking place every few steps in Bak Batal, or a chain of animation locks, leaving me effectively helpless even when I repeatedly press upon command to help. Thief's Swift Step doesn't need to be replaced, but maybe a role for Trickster would be nice, is all I'm saying. Maybe then I'd feel more comfortable and incentivized knowing that my lack of damage and trade for crowd control is worth it in the endgame. I'm always more inclined to play Thief, not only because I like a good hack and slash, but because it doesn't mix up slow and methodical with sluggish yet powerful. Perhaps it's simply a skill issue or preference, but somewhere along these lines, I can't help but to look at Elden Ring's success with balancing roll with either magic or melee. Moreover, jumping and handling also feel nerfed, and that's something I will take a stance on. It's kinda just clunky. With a mixture of a bit of input delay and animation locks, jumping is not satisfying. Especially when we think about verticality. If we're just jumping vertically upwards, yeah, it doesn't feel good. If we're trying to make a run and jump, sometimes it'll just clip onto the cliff, and I feel that's a little janky. While there are points of interest that you can run and leap across, sometimes an attempt at realistic movement doesn't always translate well to gameplay feel. And this is what Dragon's Dogma 2 struggles with at times. When you turn while running, you drift slightly, and instead feels like you're driving a car in GTA. Personally, I'm of the preference that favors responsiveness over locomotion physics. If it means I do what I want when I want it, and I press a button, then it happens, I could see myself playing much longer. Since I've played on a controller, maybe my experience is mediated by the feel of an analog stick over the snappiness of a mouse and keyboard. But the problem is, this has been a recurring issue for console gaming for years. I felt it playing Witcher 3, Genshin Impact, DD1, GTA 5, PoE, but in any case, I'd like to see slightly less locomotive feel, more responsiveness going forward. Thinking now about enemy variety, which is one of my biggest gripes, I'll go ahead and say that DD1 probably accomplishes this to a better degree. The game boasts a diverse bestiary that keeps players on their toes. Each enemy type requires a different approach, forcing players to adapt their tactics accordingly. However, some players might find that certain enemy encounters are repetitive, particularly during extended exploration or questing sessions. It's nothing to write home about, but DD2 sorely lacks variation. When you rest at a cart between towns, you'll run into an ambush at the exact same 3 or 4 points on the map, right on the bridge to Vernworth, where the enemies run out of the kingdom to attack you, right in front of Melve, in between the mountain ridges between Checkpoint and Vermund, and in the smack-down middle of the path from Checkpoint to Batal. So thankfully, it's not always scripted to happen with the same enemies. I've encountered a number of ogres and minotaurs, spectral mages, cyclops, whatever, but it's always in the same spot, and that's where I feel is repetitive. I can't tell you how often out of the 140 so hours that I've played, and that's before finishing the Unmoored World, that I've run into the same harpies, the same armored goblins, saurian lancers, exploding undead, and most annoyingly, the rattlers. Would it hurt to have maybe a cockatrice, a gargoyle, or djinn, or phoenix, a centaur, bear, a tiger, or lycanthrope? Generally something more Lovecraftian or eldritch. That's when fantasy is most at its interesting, and it seems like they're trying to go for more grounded fantasy. So I'd like to see more realistic wildlife, but if not, maybe some Lovecraftian monsters would be really cool too. The idea of goblins, mage bandits, towering cyclopses, and chimeras sound great, but the implementation and dispersion muddy the long-term adventurous spirit that franchises such as Elder Scrolls, Witcher, Dragon Age, and Warcraft, oh, and not to forget Monster Hunter, exceed in. In Witcher 3, you have so much thorough planning towards different monsters, like sharpening your silver sword or using one of the 5 circle of signs to magically boost your affinity, trap a spirit, prioritize knockback staggers, or bolster defense. Sure, it's difficult to create equilibrium in a team-based open-world action game over a single guy like Geralt of Rivia, but the self-sufficiency is there to tickle the role-playing itch. While that's not the most extreme example to use in my case, my point is, while these things are present in DD2, you can just as easily face roll most encounters. As long as you pinpoint the weakness, you're fine. If your pawn has a holy boon, you're fine, especially in the Unmoored World. If you attack the tail, you're fine. But at some point, I just kind of wish that the skills of each vocation would play more of a role. Or rather, I wish weapon skills didn't form a meta that limits you to only 3 or 4 of the same skills that everyone runs, because the others are virtually useless. And this is something that we've encountered in a lot of RPGs, a lot of battle royale games, a lot of MMOs. But when you're only limited to 3 or 4 weapon skills, 4 buttons, I just think about how much I appreciate the fact that climbing is a thing in the game that they took inspiration from Shadow of the Colossus. Because if that wasn't there, I just can't really imagine how repetitive the gameplay would feel if we didn't have climbing as part of interaction, especially when thinking about meta. And I'm not the kind of person who enjoys playing meta. Since I leveled Thief, there's barely an incentive to play skills like Shadow Veil, Plunder, Draw and Quarter, Smoke Shroud, or Masterful Kill. Stamina loss and minimal damage aren't worth taking it. I frequently found myself sticking to Formless Feint, Skull Splitter, and Powder Blast. The problem was finding the right time to set up Powder Blast before getting staggered, drawing aggro, or having the enemies run off or die before I could get the chance to activate it. Fundamentally, Enshroud or Shadow Veil is one of the most useless skills in the game because there's rarely ever a circumstance where you can sneak around enemies before they detect you. Even when used on low-level goblins, I couldn't sneak behind them and deliver any finishers. I'm sure some people were able to put it to use, but I couldn't get it to trigger, and that kind of thing is disappointing. And when a pawn uses Smokescreen, I completely struggle to see anything. Like I said, I'm not the kind of gamer who necessarily loves playing the overpowered or top damaging skills. I prefer to have experimentation and flexibility, so when I don't get to sneak in a game that gives you a tool to do it, it never actually works. That painfully sucks. It sucks even worse knowing there are infiltration quests, yet the guards will either see you through a wall or never let up aggro for you to put up that skill to use anyway. It's like the Vernworth guards have the exact same coding of a Skyrim NPC, but without any of the interesting dialogue. Sometimes they'll just attack my pawns, and I end up having to choose to kill the guards, kill my pawns, or let myself die, despite never engaging combat myself. While moments like these create interesting dynamics between gameplay moment to moment, it's just kind of frustrating. While playing Archer, I kept thinking about how good Strider felt. The quick, loose, light attack would fire off at nothing most often, so I began to only use it for downing harpies. Aside from that, it works fine, but I would much rather use Warfarer to build the Strider that I wished I already had in the game, much to the sentiment of many that I've heard over the weeks. It would be cool to see one of the Archer skills replaced with a homing shot like in DD1, but that seemed to have been given to Magic Archer. It'd be nice if Mystic Spearhand could use a sword and shield along with a polearm to fulfill the Paladin or Mystic Knight archetype. Beyond those changes, I'm mostly fine with the other vocations. My only other gripe is the lack of interest I have in Trickster. Great in concept, but feels weird to play, and it's certainly not for me. I think if you could combine some of its weapon skills to make a smoke-based weaponry and illusions more of an offensive or defensive build, it could be more worthwhile. I like to think of Moral from Hunter x Hunter as a major inspiration for why I think the vocation could be better, or really, why it looks as cool as it does. But again, I wish the variety of skills had more of a punch, or rather it had something along the lines of Smoke Jail. Smoke Prism, a full-on smoke clone that acts similarly to Final Fantasy XIV's Dark Knight, or what if Trickster had its own Formless Feint? What if you could sap the oxygen out of the area and incapacitate smaller mobs with a stun? If I want to play more aggressively with it, I want that option. Really, I'm just spewing ideas here and not trying to overly critique the game without providing substantial suggestions that simply sound like fun. Because that's the goal I want out of a Dragon's Dogma entry, a fun, experimental, and challenging gameplay loop. Right now, I don't feel experimental, I don't feel challenged, and I don't feel like there's a good loop. The most experimental with Thief that I've discovered was the Blades of the Pyre, Formless Feint, Ring of Cooling, and Stamina Curative Spam. Another would be Concussive Step and Skull Splitter to reach certain high gaps in the terrain. But as I had mentioned before, the challenge is kind of dependent on pawn synergy and responsiveness / performance. Boss mechanics are also kind of a mixed bag. While some bosses offer exhilarating battles that require strategy and patience to overcome, others feel underwhelming or even frustrating due to poor design or lackluster mechanics. My suggestion? Look at Monster Hunter. And just do that. It's Capcom. They did great with making individual bosses respond to the environment, but if you could just try to think deeper about what kind of interactions they have with things like digging, netting, wing buffeting, changing elements in mid-fight, traps, or setting up ground AoEs. Overall, I think less elite mob mechanics and a bit more raid-like mechanics would be fun. Grand Blue Fantasy Relix does a solid job at this, and so does Final Fantasy XVI. I would have much rather fought the final dragon with a raid mechanic than to chunk down its health in 5 minutes by running under its belly and spamming Skull Splitter or Eruptive Shot. The last boss is a bit of a joke in that sense. My fight with Grigory was more challenging and I could feel the weight of the fight's pacing. No phase change, no aerial phase, etc. I was just disappointed. For my last point regarding combat, I'll say that hitboxes are generally well implemented, attacks feel impactful, and landing a well-timed strike against an enemy feels immensely satisfying. The one thing I like the most is slicing off a Saurian's tail. That and sliding under a Cyclops are great ways to create dynamism where character handling fails. I would feel remiss if I didn't stop to take the time to verbalize my unwavering love for Elder Scrolls games and Skyrim. There's just something unparalleled that I've yet to experience in any other franchise. As someone who's played it since the week it came out, I keep going back to it, its soul and its ambience, because I struggle to find a game that can fill that void. And the older I become, the more I realize I probably can't. I know it's undeniably one of my favorite games, period. Sometimes there just aren't any words to convey the magnitude of nostalgia and comfort that it has provided me. Combat, story, bugs, glitches, and memes aside, I'd say its strongest element is its music and world ambience. If someone like Asmongold can listen to the original soundtrack every stream, despite never putting in more than 5 minutes into the actual game, then that just goes to show the power that Jeremy Sewell's musical compositions hold. Whenever I need to study or write a script or an essay, I like to listen to Skyrim music. It's comforting. It's cozy. It has that same immersive quality that Harry Potter or World of Warcraft or The Last of Us all have. For a game, atmosphere is second to gameplay for me. If I can't vibe with it, don't expect me to spend days making a video on it. I'm a video creator who makes analyses and reviews based on content that I vibe with. It's never negative, but if it comes across that way, it's because the title is giving me something to latch onto and care about. DD2 has made me care about atmosphere and exploration in a way that I've not felt since Skyrim. DD1 was close, but the visual fidelity at the time I played it in 2019 didn't age well. I think there's one soundtrack when walking through the forest in northern Vermont that stuck with me more than any other games. When I heard the guitar plucking, I was instantly transported back to The Last of Us 2. And I'd say for a game that isn't open world, that game has also lived up to that threshold of ambience I constantly look for. I don't know if it's the fact I love nature, or the post-apocalypse, or maybe it's the fact I sat in awe just appreciating the blades of grass and leaves swaying in the wind. Maybe it's the light leaking through the canopies, casting a luminous glow that fills me with nostalgia for a piece of environment that I can only feel attached to in disconnected, abstracted memory of childhood. As if in a dream, DD2 managed to exceed that vibe check and retain me for 100.5 hours. In 3 weeks' time, I was glued to that ambience like I was in Last of Us 2. And in that game, I had, I guess, 133 hours. So, in my perspective, it's done a phenomenal job at living up to that spirit of wonder, of nostalgia, of perhaps anemoia even. That's something I would say matters so much that I can overlook how bad the story, performance, microtransactions, handling enemies, and questing are. For all of its worth, I appreciated the fact I could take a stroll in northern Vermont and not feel like the weight of the world was incessantly pressing down on my shoulders, burdened by fate and narrative contrivances. To me, a game shouldn't feel contrived, it should feel alive. Both DD2 and Skyrim offer expansive open worlds filled with opportunities, exploration, and discovery, but they achieve this in different ways, leading to unique player experiences and replayability factors. In DD2, exploration is rewarded with these hidden treasures and secret passages and problems solvable by brute force and clever thinking. Want to cross a broken bridge? Well, there are several ways you can do that. You can either lead a Cyclops over, knock him down, cross him, then bonk him on the head, use levitate, use a concussive step, skull splitter, go around, make an icy structure as a sorcerer, etc., etc. The game's world feels alive and teeming with unscripted and scripted activity, inviting players to venture off the beaten path. However, I feel like I have to contradict myself in some level, because as much as the world feels alive in terms of combat encounters, there is a fine line between the scripted and unscripted nature of the spawn points and how you actually engage in combat, to where it feels like you're just running in a formula that considerably a loop, but not a loop that is varied or gives you room to breathe. And one thing I like about Skyrim is they packed the game with so many quests that it makes up for the lack of combat being polished in any meaningful way. There's tons of environmental storytelling that DD2 really just does not have. In DD2, there are NPCs and pawns that roam in the world, which makes it feel like you're not alone, but at the same time, they're just so dead, and they only really interact with you when you want to hire a pawn, or when these other NPCs that look like guards are hostile because you pulled a weapon on them. It's an okay interaction, but it would be nice if you could talk to them and they probably give you a bit of information about who they are, what they're doing, where they're going, or you can ask them a question about the state of the world and what they think on it. Something like that to help make the actual overarching narrative feel like it's impactful to the other aspects of the game, that there is a trickling down effect happening, and the story isn't just self-contained to the point where everything else is completely disconnected and irrelevant. In Skyrim, there are characters that tell you, oh, yes, I'm going to join the Dawn Guard. Oh, did you see that dragon? Or, do you see the sky? It's red. What happened to the sun? I come from a small village in the Pale. I used to be sweet on a girl in Helgen. I wonder if so-and-so is still making those sweet juniper berries. Or even something like going into a tavern and seeing and hearing musicians play the lute or a guitar or some sort of instrument. That feels good. But I would give that point to Skyrim because they actually have the NPCs sing a song relevant to the lore, the history of the world. They're singing about the Dragonborn. They're singing about their unwavering faith in Ulfric Stormcloak. The music in DD2 is generic. It's not offensively bad, but it's not giving you anything to sit there and just listen, you know? While it's cool that some ogres or cyclopses just run out into the forest and the camera pans over, zooms in, and you see them just thrashing their way through the trees. While that's cool, it would also be cool to have something like we're in Skyrim. Oh man, this thief runs up to you and says, hey, can you do me a favor? I need you to hold on to this. Don't tell them that I was here or where I went. Can you do that for me? Oh, thank you. And then you have the choice. You could just kill him. You can take his loot. You can give the loot to the guard, or you can kill the guard, or you can make sure the guard doesn't actually know that they were there. You can misdirect them. Something like that. Something to break up the monotony. You know how in Red Dead Redemption 2, there's a moment where you can actually look out into the distance of a forest and you could see like a dead wolf that maybe you just killed, and then you take a step back and then another wolf comes up, sits at the dead wolf and kind of mourns or howls. That's really cool. It shows that the world is teeming with emotion and not just danger and brutality, that all the animals aren't just monsters, they're living beings with sentient feelings. And this is what makes the spontaneous quests or events or interactions so memorable in Skyrim, is that they just happen on their own. You wander around to a random location and you see an orc who just wants to die fighting. They want to have a good fight to the death. They seek a good death. That's something I feel like could really make DD2 so memorable. Those moments where you can just come up to a random NPC and they give you one simple little task, and it's more than just go here, get me 3 gold ore. Go here, break this guy out of the jail, go find him a place so he can read books or something, and then never actually means anything. He doesn't contribute to the story at all. I don't even remember his name because he doesn't matter. He's a douchebag. You did all this for him. I literally went to the jail, couldn't figure out how to break him out because the guards were there and I didn't want to initiate combat, and every time I did, I would get stuck in that combat and I would either run away, come back, they would still be hostile, I would get arrested because I was there, I was trespassing and I was breaking him out, and then over and over I would just be stuck in this loop of, man, I couldn't reload my save because it's been a while since I went to an inn, so I can't just reload all the way back there and make my way back here, because what would it matter? I just need to complete this without killing guards. Like, I don't really want to kill an NPC that I don't have to. I'm not doing that kind of playthrough. Nor do I want to spend so much time in a jail cell bribing guards just to get out of a situation that I probably could have avoided. Skyrim has that kind of moment, but it's to a point where it's just frustrating, you know? It's frustrating in a good and bad way. It's polarizing. But the more time I reflect on my overall experience, the less I actually remember those moments in DD2, because I only remember the emotion of just being frustrated by it, not by, oh man, I'm having such a good time just doing fuck all, you know? The sense of discovery is heightened by dynamism. Things like a day-night cycle and the weather system, which both affect gameplay and atmosphere, are good things. I'm glad there's a day and night cycle, but I wish there was more variety. Again, like, variety is a key word in this entire video, is the fact that there's no real snow terrain or snow season, there's no autumn, everything is just evergreen or rocky sand or just volcanic magma or ash. For example, traveling at night can be more perilous due to increased monster activity, while rainstorms can obscure visibility and create a sense of tension. But not to forget, the same cycle affects crafting materials, leaving many players to rest at benches, ripen apples and grapes, and then sell them at a vendor in Dogma for fast and easy gold. This is the kind of cheesy thing that breathes through Skyrim, and I can live with that. It doesn't break the game, so there's no big deal to worry about it. There just needs to be more visual variety. While both games offer side quests and optional activities, Skyrim places a greater emphasis on player-driven narratives and world-building through its vast array of books, notes, and NPC interactions. In contrast, Dragon's Dogma relies more on traditional quest structures and scripted encounters to engage players in exploration. So spiritually, Dragon's Dogma shares with Skyrim a sense of immersion and exploration that rewards you with loot and emergent gameplay experiences, but still manages to feel shallow in its impact. In this section, I want to discuss some narrative themes in the first game to give a premise for the appeal of the second game. In Dragon's Dogma, the main story delves into themes of cycles, destiny, and the role of the Seneschal, while also exploring the concept of free will through the player's pawn. These themes intertwine to create a narrative that challenges traditional notions of fate and agency within the game world. Central to the story is the concept of the Everfall, right? A mysterious chasm beneath the city of Grand Soren that serves as this nexus of cyclical events, kind of Demon Souls-esque. The Everfall represents a repeating cycle of destruction and rebirth, where the world is periodically consumed by darkness only to be renewed again. This cyclical nature is reflected in the rise and the fall of the Arisen, individuals chosen by the dragon to challenge fate and determine the course of the world's destiny. At the heart of this cycle is the role of the Seneschal, an immortal being tasked with overseeing the world and guiding the Arisen on their journey. The Seneschal represents the culmination of the cycle, the ultimate fate that awaits all who challenge the dragon. However, the Seneschal's existence is marked by solitude and fatigue, trapped in an internal cycle of observation and contemplation. The themes of cycles is further exacerbated through the Player's pawn, a customizable companion who accompanies the Arisen on their quest. Pawns are beings without will or desire, bound to serve their master unquestioningly. However, as the story progresses, the player's pawn begins to exhibit signs of individuality and self-awareness, questioning their purpose and seeking to understand their place in the world. This theme of free will versus fate is central to the player's journey in Dragon's Dogma. As the Arisen, players are tasked with defying destiny and shaping the course of the world's fate. Through their actions and decisions, players challenge the predetermined order of the world, confronting powerful foes and ultimately determining their own path. The inclusion of pawns adds a layer of development and self-awareness that raises questions about the nature of existence and the possibility of breaking free from that cycle of fate. By giving the pawn a will of their own, DD1 explores the ideas of individual agency and the power of choice in shaping one's own path. With this section, I want to take a few minutes to touch on some quest, bits of lore, and characters that I like, and how that experience can be improved in terms of theme, plot, and reward structure. My biggest concern for the story is that I don't have a reason to care. One, I can get over being the chosen one because the trope is everywhere, but I don't like when the game's whole plot revolves around everyone telling you to take back the throne and be the rightful sovereign. Honestly, that sucks. It's the same issue I have with Skyrim. You can't just be anyone, and that's something we've come to expect being the Arisen, but being the ruler on top of that is suffocating. Because in one ending we do get that luxury, but it feels too quick and shallow of a reward, and the game makes it feel like it's shaming you for picking that. Because as soon as you pick it, the game's over, that's it. That's your happy ending, and it's supposed to feel kind of bittersweet, but it's just completely bitter. A big part is because what reason do we have to care about a land we're told we're supposed to protect? If I were to make a choice, I just don't want the Arisen to inherently be the ruler. You're forcing me into a narrative that is rushed and completely undercooked, and I don't feel any meaningful reason for why I should be in the first place. They can be protectors, but as a player, I don't like the idea of being bound by a kingdom I wake up practically enslaved to, and then told it's my destiny to rule over them all. Especially when many players straight up kill people on sight and still get rewarded for that ending. It seems counterproductive to tell us to be who you want, but you have to do this, you have to be this. Even if you don't act like a good person throughout the whole time of the game, logging dozens of civilian kills, don't then equate all those choices to nothingness. Have that be one of the endings and keep it limited to that. Maybe have thematic choices sprinkled throughout where you can showcase your worthiness. I think that'd be a decent idea. It's there, but it only really comes up here and there. Since people at first didn't believe you were Arisen, and you showed your bravery in combat, do the same with solving quarrels and disputes. I actually loved, and this is a spoiler, but I don't really care, I'm talking about it now, Unmoored World, how Manila tasked you to help the people out, gaining their favor to seek refuge. Have more side quests like that where you can have the option to solve things peacefully. Maybe a neutral playthrough would be cool. It gets you to try a whole different approach, or you could be a stern, firm, and unwavering Arisen who doesn't take a no for an answer and thrives on the battlefield. The Baron questline steps towards that, weighted in some emotional baggage on the part of Baron's racial discrimination by Verminians. So just expand it more. Have Baron periodically teach you more skills as you spar with him. If you beat him, you get the skill and piece of warrior gear. Over time, build tension within the camp, having some soldiers like him and having others despise him. When the Cyclops attacks and he pretty much knows that it's over for him, have him gain favor with the camp and lead them into smaller skirmishes and encounters here and there. Kind of like Skyrim Civil War questing mixed with the monster culling in DD2. Once you gain political and local favor, use your sway to convince them to re-enlist Baron. Baron thanks you and you spar with him one last time, but now actually make it challenging and have phases. If you fail to beat the monster skirmishes, you don't get to bring him back. And if you fail to beat Baron, you don't get this skill. There's your lasting consequence. You weren't good enough to beat him, so why do you deserve to have the ultimate skill? I think Meister Quest could be more like this suggestion too. If you remove all of the repeatable escorts and instead attach a real plot and point to them. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware that the story and questing are just backdrops to give you something to do so you can engage with the main system, which is the combat, it doesn't hurt to have something that's actually worth playing, you know? With Sacred Arbor, I felt like it was so severely underutilized and undercooked, you could entirely miss out on it and not really miss a beat in theme. In this game, potential doesn't matter because they don't give you anything worth doing it for, and not even narrative experience. So I would rather see the whole trial of the Archer thing expanded on. Anything more would be fine. I think just more and variety, 2 keywords here. I don't even have as much of an idea as I did with Baron, but I just want a reason to be invested past the one-time thing. Not all quests have to be well thought out and articulated, but it'd be nice if the ones that we do have were, because there really just aren't that many quests. So maybe helping the elves open up to the people of Northern Vermont or Vernworth could be a start thematically, and then as a reward, perhaps you learn Elvish and no longer need a translator. I question what purpose they serve at all. Ragnar almost reminds me of Xenos in Final Fantasy XIV, just without the being bored by everything except the Warrior of Light gimmick. Ragnar's gimmick could be like a checkpoint to test your progress throughout the game. In your first encounter, you're scripted to lose. In the second, you're scripted again, but you have more of a chance. Then in the next 2 meetings, he's stronger and he's scripted to escape your final blow. Then in your last fight, you can choose to kill him or subdue him. I'd rather have him serve this rival role than to be some guy who just wants to fight you, but only does it once and isn't even a challenge. The point is to make a fun character who relishes the moment of combat, just as many other players do. If he's not used for anything else, use him for that. Honestly, I think it's a shame that he and so many others are just utterly undercooked. I think the Phantom Ox card is one of the most interesting quests in concept, but it's too short and inconsequential to warrant a whole cutscene. I can't remember the name of the questline, but in the slums of Vernworth, there's a little girl you meet, starting out by giving her various items to help her out. Then some boy from a royal household comes to you wanting to help his mother, so you help him find a double and prepare to make from elf. This honestly would have been cool to have this be the one escort quest that makes sense to be an escort quest, if done right. So what if you venture out and have several cutscenes or dialogue with the boy as you head to Melv? Along the way you show him how to craft, how to slay a monster, how to spot an ambush, how to spot when a peddler is hustling you, etc, etc. This could be like an Ellie and Joel situation almost, where you take on a mentor role for a few days, showing him the world as you would navigate it. The purpose is to help his mother, but it's too dangerous to do it on his own, right? Which, being the Arisen, to me, this would be a great way to earn noble favor and establish a reason to care. What could also make this engaging is the player choice. You have the option to teach him both right and wrong, leading to a final choice where moral ambiguity could creep in if you don't set a positive example. If you show him yourself killing civilians or killing a certain number of animals, or maybe hoard everything in your inventory, or maybe you attack and throw around your pawns, this all culminates in some decision he makes at the end of the journey back, where maybe he kills someone, and now you can either take the blame for him, snitch on him, or help him cover it up. Again, food for thought. One last critique of note is how the girl who acted as his double turned out to be his sister, which was a cool twist that they failed to capitalize on. The quest, for me at least, ends there and nothing comes from the whole thing in the form of a payoff. Personally, I'm a story enjoyer, so these things matter to me in the long term. One thing I do dislike, don't create a problem or inconvenience just to sell the solution. In other words, don't put a port crystal in Harv when one should have been in Batal. Don't randomly kill Captain Brandt in a Drake attack, leaving me to spend the next 2 hours figuring out how to find him, not even knowing he was in the morgue to begin with. Don't make me waste 3 hours trying to find a Finder's token, which is the very first Seeker's token you get, when I'm already 70 hours into the game. Because I found 50 of those before finally finding the one that I needed, and it was next to a Riftstone by Trovomine. Also, don't put NPCs in weird locations whenever I need to talk to them, because if I can't get to Hugo when he's in the jail cell due to him being turned around and several feet out from the door, I'm forced to try ridiculous methods to work around an issue that didn't even need to happen. While I do appreciate the bits of trying to figure out the workaround of this behavior to find emergent gameplay within these moments. Sometimes they're just a little unnecessary and aren't the right places to do so because they just break quests. For example, I killed one of the guards after he attacked me for breaking into Hugo's cell. Then once I couldn't engage in dialogue with him, I reloaded a save and then the same thing happened. I talked to the one guy in the other cell. He told me their boss killed Hugo's parents and that he went off to some ancient battleground. So I went up to there, found no one, went back, picked up Hugo, carried him outside. He thanked me. And now I had to go find him a job. So what do I do to make sure that I didn't break any quests and that I could experience all that I could without having to waste another 100 hours of my time in another playthrough where scaling is absolutely minimal or abysmally non-existent to the point where I don't even feel inclined to play New Game Plus because there's no real challenge to begin with, making it only worthwhile if you've gone to do a quest that you didn't do. But the problem with that is, again, you're wasting a lot of hours just to get to that point. Turns out a lot of people ran into these various bugs, and I learned that there are 2 jobs that he could do. I did the entire Wilhelmina romance quest, which I wasn't even aware you could do. Made sure not to get her arrested. She ran off, and I didn't realize Bread could secure your safety, but regardless, it didn't even matter, because once I finished it, with a little help from YouTube, I went back to Hugo, told him to work there, and finally I could complete it after 3 days. What sucked about that is that I tried the other job option with the guy at the vendor who wanted both tomes for his own thing, but since I had already spared him by forging a fake, he didn't kill his family and closed the shop. I like that there's a trade-off in that sense with the quest, but not at the expense of locking out opportunities I didn't even know I had available. It's just the other portion to that whole ordeal that I had to deal with that I didn't enjoy. And sometimes I'm willing to forego emergent gameplay if it means that I get to experience what I want to experience. A few other quests like the Ulrica romance would have been cool to do, and that's what I wanted all along. What I didn't realize is that the game locks you out of that experience if you go to the coronation before attempting to raise her affinity in Melv. And then in the Unmoored world, Melv was gone. I don't know if I missed something, but I didn't even realize that Melv was destroyed. I was looking at the cutscene and it just didn't even register if Melv was the one being destroyed. I tried going there and I realized I couldn't. I was like, wait, what? What happened? Like, Melv was gone. I was like, what? I didn't even realize that. I was like, well, damn, I couldn't even get to Ulrica. And that's the one quest line that everyone likes talking about because it's the romance quest. It's what everyone likes to do. Right now, I'm debating if these missable or easily breakable quests warrant a second playthrough. Like I said before, the difficulties, story, and gearing aren't necessarily enough to keep me immersed for the same amount of time to get to that point. So if anything, I would be skipping through dialogue in order to get to it. And that's an experience I've never really had with Skyrim, Dragon Age, or even Star Wars The Old Republic. Those games have varying narrative quality, but at the very least I could get into it a second or third time and learn something I didn't before. I just don't feel like DD2 has that narrative replayability, and perhaps that's never been the goal. It mostly comes down to the futility of the main story. Nothing really matters or has emotional weight aside from the true ending, but even then it happens so quickly that once it starts, 5 minutes pass, half the time you're in a cutscene and you're already starting over. You aren't given much time to absorb the enormity of what just happened, and frankly, what is there to ponder? I feel like they squandered the potential that the first game in the trailer set up. At first, I thought that they were going for a multiversal angle. Then I thought it could be some soft reboot, but still has referential material, which is kind of the case, but with some unanswered questions regarding the true breaking of the cycle, the Pathfinder possibly being the Seneschal, or some being who's a greater god managing an overarching time or flow of time that the Arisen and Dragon are cyclically tied to. This is all interesting, but some more questions I want to think about. Is the final dragon the actual brine? Is the brine a representation or embodiment of the end times? Was the first Arisen's Godbane kill in DD1 a pointless effort if their main pawn ends up as the dragon or the Seneschal anyway? If that's the case, then is the point of the whole franchise the fact that cycles can't be broken in that universe? Is the Arisen's opposition to fate truly their own will, or some preordained path that is overseen by the confines of the literal game? And if that's also the case, then what would be Dragon's Dogma 3? Are the players in some way doomed to repeat the ever so repeating nature of the franchise? With all of these questions, I want to know more about them, but at the same time, the themes presented and how they're presented make me less excited for any real answer, knowing they aren't really willing to take the risk and give us a game that is worth the $70. If the story is about a 4-hour cutscene, broken up by time-gated checkpoints, underwhelming final bosses, spammable enemies around every corner, and uninteresting characters that don't contribute to any greater theme of choice, then what is the narrative point? Honestly, I think they could have gone with the Monster Hunter approach, where it's boss to boss in instance zones. It would probably be a better narrative at the expense of open world. But even then, the world isn't a GTA, a Red Dead Redemption, Elder Scrolls, a World of Warcraft map. It's more of a retreaded series of paths that loosely connect together at central points. Essentially, it's one of those racetracks at an amusement park. You'll often retread the same road, fighting the same enemies, and not have a moment to breathe. I would say for sure the inclusion of pawns makes questing and exploration a better experience. You can toss your pawns off a cliff, have them pick up a chest, translate Elvish, mark materials on your map, ripen apples and grapes, notify you of ladders, hint at an opponent's weakness, and miraculously save you from a fall that could have cost you several hours. They could also die unexpectedly, straight up walk off the ledge, and nonchalantly commit genocide on an entire city. Don't think we have forgotten. Fortunately and unfortunately, I haven't experienced Dragon's Plague to say for certain how I feel about this emergent experience. But I don't hate the idea. I just wish they didn't nerf it to begin with. I mean, apparently some people have experienced it one too many times in a single playthrough. Meanwhile, there are those like me who have yet to experience at all. And that's not even me trying to avoid it. I don't look for the Dragon's Plague. Whenever a pawn says something ignorant, I just replace them because it's time to replace them anyway. It's more of a back thought and not something that I actively consider even when the prompt shows up. But it is the kind of thing that games need more of, to make the player weigh the consequence of speeding through a game and have them deal with points of no return that you're incentivized to work around. I like that. But once again, not at the expense of having to do a chore that is just not fun. Overall, this is all fair criticism that too many videos and comments have chosen to overlook in favor of MTX discourse. They're free to have that conversation, but there are too many other topics that I think should be talked about more, because the game isn't a 10 out of 10 IGN. If I had to sum up my thoughts in an overall rating, I'd probably go for the sake of brevity, a 7.5 out of 10. Priority is combat, and everything else is more so secondary and tertiary. For me, combat is king, story is queen, art direction is prince, music and ambience are the duke, and after that, it's whatever. Even with better performance and no microtransactions, the game would still be a 7.5, all topics considered. The story, which involves all bits of questing, because those are supposed to build themes and investment and reward structures, to all congregate to drop the overall score of a whole 1.5 points. The other point is dropped due to the aforementioned points about enemies, handling and customization, and the lack of skill and variety. But regardless, I don't want to give the wrong idea. I do love this game, and I think it's a must-try for anyone who enjoys the first and wants to experience a game that's all about experiencing. In my book, it may not win Game of the Year, and it may not even ever dethrone Skyrim's legacy. That's a hard nut to crack. That's a hard legacy to follow up with, even for Bethesda. And it may not play like Elden Ring. It may not have a better story than the likes of Diablo 4. But what it lacks, it makes up for in ways that might just give you or anyone a scratch to the itch of games released in the past few years. DD2 is what I would consider a gem in the rough. It has potential, but it has a long ways to go. And fundamentally, I think it's just flawed in a way that it'll never be a 10 out of 10, much to the same dismay of the first. While disappointing in a number of ways, it is undeniable. With untapped potential, it could be a game that we play 5 years from now, but it all depends on handled DLC. Crucially, is it about speedrunning or playing broken builds? It's not MTX or performance. It's about immersion and expressing oneself through satisfying combat and medievalism. Hopefully, that's not lost on people. You don't have to stop chasing the chase if it gives you purpose, but every once in a while, it's okay to stop and absorb what's right in front of you, taking in, for its short-lived life, and then moving on to the next thing.